Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Sausis. Most yoga practitioners would agree that yoga improves their health and makes them feel and look better. But is this true or just a popular belief? Can yoga really improve the health of those who practice it? To answer this question, I've invited today a doctor. He's Baxter Bell. Welcome, Baxter.
Nice to be here. Thanks.
Baxter has been actively deepening his understanding of yoga and relaxation since making the stress-reducing move from a career as a busy family doctor to that of a yoga teacher and medical acupuncturist. He is now involved in the integration of therapeutic applications of yoga with Western medicine, lecturing to healthcare professionals around the country, as well as adding yoga to his care of patients in his medical acupuncture practice. He's a graduate of the Piedmont Yoga Studio's 18th Man Advanced Studies program and has since become director of their Deep Yoga program, teaching the Experiential Anatomy, yoga technique, and yoga methodology portions of the training. He is also on faculty for several teacher training programs around the country. He studied with Rodney Yee, Patricia Walden, and Erich Schiffmann, and has been strongly influenced by the work of TKV Desikachar and Donald Moyer. Baxter teaches classes, workshops, and retreats around the country and internationally. Baxter, what was your first experience with yoga? When did you meet yoga for the first time?
Well, I met yoga asana for the first time back in the early 90s. Prior to that, I think I was dabbling in yoga philosophy in a sense, because I was always interested in comparative mythology, the work of people who had been looking at Eastern traditions, Western traditions, North American, South American traditions. And so I was always really interested in how spirituality had evolved and came to be in different parts of the world where there was perhaps very little contact with people, but very similar stories were arising. So that might have been my first inkling of the roots of yoga. But yoga asana I met in about 1994. And it was, I always kid around that I was tricked into doing yoga the first time. My girlfriend at the time was staying at my home. She decided she wanted to do a little practice. She had put in a DVD, they weren't DVDs at that time, a VHS tape, and was watching Rodney Yee practice and doing it. And I wandered by, and I was kind of intrigued by what the poses were that she was doing, and I watched the screen, and I saw this very strong male figure there doing and teaching the yoga. And I said, hey, could I try that? And she just happened to have an extra sticky mat there. And so I think I was set up. And so, I did the rest of the practice, and although I found the asanas physically challenging and demanding and interesting and intriguing, it was really the moment of relaxation and mental awareness and breath work where something really unique and different was happening for me in that moment. And that was really the hook that brought me back again to trying yoga after that. It was really that experience of dropping in, quieting the mind, and kind of opening up to that spaciousness that regular yoga practitioners, of course, get a taste of almost every time they practice, but I had never done that before, so it was quite interesting. And I was a busy family doc at the time, so I was usually on the go, and it was very unusual for me to have a moment to pause, reflect, turn my attention inward, and reflect a little bit on what I was doing, so it was very powerful.
And so you mentioned the philosophical aspects, then you mentioned yoga asana. When or how did the spiritual aspect come in?
I think as soon as I started to study asana, and in particular when I started to have the opportunity to take classes with more experienced teachers, I was very interested in the utilization of the Sanskrit language in class. Whenever a bit of philosophy was woven into physical practice, I was very intrigued by that. So I think that as I started to practice a little more regularly and I became exposed to experienced teachers who had a little wisdom to share, I really was fascinated by that. And certainly as time went on, when I got into my teacher training program in 2000, I was really, I guess perhaps the physical aspects and the anatomy aspects were things I was familiar with, but the philosophical aspects were a little newer to me, and so I was very intrigued by that. And so I really found myself drawn to reading several different translations of the sutras and the Bhagavad Gita, and then a couple of years later when I got to go to India and study at the TKV Desikachar school, the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram in Chennai, it was by far my favorite course was the philosophy course. And I found that having read and immersed myself in it, there were a lot of questions that I had. And it was a perfect place to pick the mind and the experience and the wisdom of an experienced teacher in India and really dive in. And I felt a little awkward because I realized I was one of the only people in that group of international students who seemed to have that much interest in that course. I was really, really wanting to know the subtleties of some of the terminology and how they related to the cosmology of Sankhya philosophy and all those sorts of things. So I think that's how my interest in philosophy grew out of my initial practice of asana in the early 90s and then kind of getting into it more over time.
And do you now know how that philosophical aspect of yoga helps or informs the physical practice? Do you have a better understanding of that now? Even for you or for your...
I mean, personally, it definitely does. So, I think what happens is when you move beyond the mere physical, and you start to say, well, why were people practicing yoga? Why have people continued to practice yoga? That's where I think the philosophical underpinning comes in. So there's actually purpose. There's actually goals that are set. There are actually ways of evaluating and discerning. So using viveka and these very specific concepts and applying them to how you're working moment by moment. So, when I practice, for instance, asana at home, I usually sit or recline for a moment and reflect on the current state of affairs in my physical body and my energetic body and my emotions that day. And then I let that be that's going to inform what I'm going to be doing for the next period of time in my practice. And I also find as my practice has matured that I'm interested in meditating more regularly. Asana, it's interesting. I still enjoy it. I find that it has benefit. But really the breath work and the meditation are becoming much more intriguing. It's the subtler practices where, as I've been telling students recently as we've done some sound work in class, chanting the bija seed sounds with the chakra centers of the body, I say, the yogis say that, chanting out loud is powerful, but chanting quietly is 1,000 times more powerful, and chanting mentally is even 1,000 times more powerful. So that subtle aspect is something that I'm experiencing, that sometimes getting quieter and quieter, the less you do, in some ways, the more is revealed on some days. Not always, but on some days.
Yes.
So for me, I think that's how the philosophical understanding and continued dialogue has been informing my own practice. And, it's challenging when I teach a public class that's not a therapeutic class, and I'm sure we'll talk about therapeutic aspects of yoga in our time together. It can be challenging on how one's going to introduce philosophical concepts, but fortunately, right now I'm reading Panditji's book. The leader of the Himalayan Institute has this lovely book that he's just written on the first part of the Yoga Sutras, chapter 1. And I'm just loving some of his phrasing and his translations and the way he's bringing the concepts across. And so when inspired, I try to find a way to bring that into my class teaching, which is just, for me, it makes my teaching so much more fun and interesting.
We'll go there. We'll go there in a minute. But I'm interested in knowing, you were saying that you were a busy doc at the time. What in yoga made you make this move, this change of change of career?
I think there were probably several aspects of that. There was the intensity of Western practice of medicine in which, and I had done kind of the fast track. I went to college, I went directly into medical school, I went directly into a 3-year family practice residency, I went directly into a busy practice. So that all happened over the course of 12 years before I entered practice. And then, through that, of course, the physical demands and the mental demands, the emotional demands are pretty intense. So, then about 5 years into my private practice, So tack another 5 years on. So about 17 years into this process of educating oneself and learning the tools of medicine, I meet yoga. And suddenly, as opposed to kind of surging forward continuously, I had this moment of pausing and reflecting and feeling and noticing. And I couldn't help but notice that that time had its toll, that I was physically exhausted, that I was ungrounded in many ways, that I was pushing. And so, there was that aspect of coming into realization of what the present state of affair was in my own body and in my mind and my heart. And in that moment and then being exposed to what was really a very beautiful practice that had a quality of loving kindness to it, had some beautiful things that weren't necessarily foreign to the idea of practicing medicine, altruism, doing something that was a benefit to other beings and such. I started to realize, there's other ways of being in the world, and in a way that one can be a healer of sorts, and it might be different than the way I started off thinking about things. I used to have this concept in my mind, kind of a Marcus Welbian concept, that one became a family doctor and one was a family doctor until the day one died. In fact, you were probably still taking care of folks into your 80s if you were physically able to. Because I'd actually known a few family docs like that, and I still do. I have a student of mine who's the oldest student I have, who's 93, and Doc Arias lives in Wyoming, and I see him twice a year when I'm there. And he's been coming to my sessions over the years. At first he came just to hear who this doctor was who taught yoga. He wanted to see what was up, because this is a man who's retired but continues to attend medical meetings regularly. His mind is incredibly sharp. And other than kind of some physical decline and some difficulty with his hearing, he's mentally right there. But what's been intriguing is in the last 2 visits, he's been sitting in and actually trying the practices when we get to the physical practices.
Oh, nice.
So here this 93-year-old man is standing by his chair side doing some standing work. I give him some alternatives in the chair, and he's really been loving this opportunity to continue to learn about himself. So the same thing happened for me. I was learning about myself, and I was learning that there was this whole new way possibly of being. So this one way of viewing my professional career was meeting a new desire in my heart, which was to dive into the yoga practice both for personal reasons, but then I started to think, well, I shouldn't say I was thinking about teaching. It took about 4 or 5 years. And then one of my teachers, a nationally known teacher, Rodney Yee, I was on retreat. We were taking a walk, just the 2 of us, and I had been on several other retreats with him. I'd met his family. I had taken care of his son in the middle of the night in Bali when his son started to have breathing difficulties. So he knew that I was a physician and I was skilled enough to, to have my chops. And he turned to me as we were walking and he said, "Have you ever thought about doing this? And I said, "Doing what?" And he said, "Teaching yoga." And I hadn't had a conscious thought of it, I am sure. I hadn't had that conscious thought. But it was a powerful moment, and he planted that little seed in my mind. And that was in January of 1999. And by March, when attending a couple of cocktail parties, my wife at the time overheard me saying some things to some guys that I was friends with, that I was thinking about taking a sabbatical and moving to California to study yoga. And so at that point, the hand on the shoulder pulled me away to say, "What are you talking about?" So, I think, which is sometimes a male trait that sometimes we process internally and don't always share externally. So in that moment, the gig was up and my plans were revealed, wow. At least something that had been percolating in my mind. And then things started to move quickly to actually coming out here, and I live in Northern California, where you are, of course, and starting to study yoga more intensely.
Wow.
So there was this gradual shift. I started to practice yoga. I think my mind started to open up. My heart started to question things that I had taken for granted. Avidya, perfect example of the misconceptions of my reality. My reality expanded and shifted. And I realized there was another possibility for me, and I never thought of that. I thought medicine was it. It was the cat's meow. I had a really good life. I was very successful. I had a wonderful practice. I had fabulous patients. I was very busy and in demand. And yet, like a lot of us, we realized there's still that seed of dissatisfaction, not quite satisfied all the way around. The material benefits were not enough. The accolades of my community were not enough. There was something that my own soul needed. So there was that quality of discovery as well. And I was actually pretty frightened. I can't say I've been that frightened in my life. Since I've been a child, I've always felt fairly confident in the world in many ways, but I was a little frightened about making that change. What would it mean? What was I giving up? Was it really a smart move? And I sat down one day and I just said, well, let's see if it's possible. And I looked at the factors that would have to make it possible for me to leave this and move to that. And I realized, oh, I could do this if I wanted. I had been, frugal and conservative, and I hadn't been crazy with money and stuff. And so I could actually take a sabbatical and study something I really was interested in. So, and the doors opened professionally. My partners were like, oh, this sounds great. You should go and do what your heart desires. We wish you best. We hope you come back and share it with us, but you should go do this if you really feel strongly. And that was beautiful. What a beautiful gift to get from my senior partner, who was like another father figure to me.
Yeah, I imagine that.
Yeah.
But now what's interesting is that even though you're talking about teaching yoga, but in a way you're applying yoga for therapeutics or with a therapeutic intention. So what is the healing aspect of yoga? What in yoga is healing? Can yoga help healing?
Yes, and maybe. Because I think we have to be a little mindful that there's a tendency to be a little overzealous if we're in the field of yoga and yoga therapy. There's an old saying, to a carpenter, everything looks like a nail, right? Because the hammer is your tool. And so for the yogi, the yoga tools could be applied to everything and anything. When I was first in medical practice, my senior partner came into my office one day and he laid down an advertisement, a one-sheet paper from a local chiropractor, and the chiropractor had listed every condition known to man that he said chiropractic could be applied to. And my partner was incensed. He said, this is why I don't refer to chiropractors. Now, interestingly, now I do refer to chiropractors because I think, like anything, there's appropriate things that chiropractic can be applied to. And I think yoga is that way as well. I do think there are some global benefits of yoga, what I call the global benefits of yoga. And I think that anyone that has a well-rounded practice that includes some physical practice, some breath awareness, some meditation, any of the other tools, some chanting, using sound, does some good works in the community. There is this effect that a lot of times we talk about when we attend our conferences like you and I did recently in June in Austin, Texas, that the effect on the nervous system, that really yoga, at least modern yoga, the way we're teaching now, seems to have a very nice modulating effect on our nervous system. Mm-hmm. And because of that, and because of the fact that all the body systems are interrelated, which actually is very different than I used to think about the body when I was in family medicine, but that all the systems are interrelated, that the endocrine system communicates with the nervous system, which communicates with my heart, which influences my lungs, which influences my digestion. That because of this interrelatedness of the body's systems, that when we can influence one system, we can influence all systems in a way. And sometimes it's subtle, and sometimes it's more profound. And for some people it works effectively, and for others this practice is not going to be as effective. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think yoga is incredibly powerful. I think it can help many things. I don't think it's necessarily always a standalone treatment. I think it's well integrated with other modalities, like regular physical exercise, like group processing. You, as with a background in psychology, I'm sure can appreciate this, where, for instance, someone with an illness might actually talk about how they're feeling emotionally with other people that are going through the same process, mm-hmm. with what I think you call just compassionate listening, mm-hmm. where people just acknowledge and listen, and that's also very powerful, with really sound choices in nutrition and diet. So I think that, in a way, yoga is a great tool to integrate with other lifestyle tools for optimal healing and optimal health.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's somehow more common to associate some of the asanas or the physical aspects of yoga with healing. But as we were discussing earlier, yoga also includes breath work and meditation and other aspects. Are those other aspects healing as well?
Very much so.
Uh-huh.
An example for you. I spent some time up here in Northern California in the town of Petaluma, just up the road from you. And I would go up there twice a week to work in an office and do medical acupuncture. And that simply means I'm a physician who's done postgraduate training in acupuncture to be able to offer that as a tool to my patients here in California. So I'm at the office, and mostly I'm doing acupuncture. But my partner there knows that I'm also a yoga teacher. He's a physician and he's attended my classes when I've taught at workshops and retreats and stuff. And so he sends one of his patients to see me because of some chronic pain issues. And she's a manager at a busy business. She's got 30 or 40 people underneath her. She's on her computer, on the phone, in personal meetings all day long. And she had a car accident. She had some persistent neck pain. And it's not, the pain is a little bit better, but it's there still. And so she finds that she's thinking so much about this pain that it's getting really difficult for her to focus effectively on her job. And she's becoming very concerned about this, pretty anxious. And so he asked her to see me for some yoga tools. So the first thing I said is, we're just going to learn how to follow our breath mindfully. And I basically taught her what our viewing audience might know is just basic mindfulness on the breath. Mm-hmm. She had never done anything like this. She had never done any yoga in her life. And she was in, I would guess, probably in her mid-40s. So I teach her this simple mindfulness technique. And I say, in your office tomorrow, try to find several minutes in the morning, in the afternoon, before you leave, where you just take 30 seconds or a minute. Set your watch, do something where you just pay attention to your breath. So she learns it. She goes home and she's thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this tomorrow? And she's taking a bath. And I don't know if you know this, but in the bathroom, when you're in the tub, there's a kind of an echoey resonance, and she could hear her breath very clearly. Mm-hmm. And she's like, wow, I can really experience my breath right now in such a clear way. How could I recreate that at the office tomorrow? And then she recalled that one time before, when she'd had earplugs in, the breath had the same quality. And she thought, I'm going to take my earplugs to work tomorrow. When I'm not on the phone, when I'm on the computer and not talking with others, I'm going to put the earphones in, pause, and do my breath technique. She stopped in a day later. She reported that her pain level had diminished 50% in 24 hours.
Imagine.
Doing one simple beginning level yogic technique of mindful breath awareness. Mm-hmm. So, to me, that's my favorite story, because it's so simple, but it's so beautiful and simple that someone took the teaching, practiced it when they got home, figured out how I'm going to apply this in my real life, made it happen, and then reaped some benefits from that.
Well, I don't know if you would agree with this, but people who are using yoga for therapeutic reasons are usually the most serious students. Because the regular students, well, yeah, go, they don't go, it's that little bit different, but yes. Sometimes the people who are in need really take the techniques really to heart.
They do, yeah, and I think that's why when you have students or community members who come to see you as a yoga therapist, or a yoga teacher who has experience in the therapeutic aspects of yoga, their motivation is much higher.
Yes.
And so you're more likely to have them, and it's, I see this a lot. And sometimes, in my capacity as a physician, medical acupuncturist, and yoga teacher, a lot of people have family members or friends who say, you should go see this guy. And they go to see me not because they wanted to come, but because someone encouraged them to come. And those students, again, are there at someone else's encouragement. So I may teach something very similar to them, but I find that sometimes they do not follow through because the motivation is not their own.
Yeah.
The motivation is coming from someone else's encouragement. Mm-hmm. So the people who are there really, when they come in and they say, I'm really looking for something that can really help me because I'm really struggling. Yeah. Those are the folks who are hungry yes. to learn the techniques, to commit to a regular practice. Yes. And when they return, I usually have them come back in 2 weeks or 4 weeks for a follow-up. When they come back in and I say, tell me about how your practice has been going. And they say, well, every day I sit down and I do the practice. I say, well, tell me what's been happening. And I know that there's going to be a really good result. Yeah. And invariably, they've been seeing results already. Yeah. When the first thing that they say is, well, I haven't actually done anything since you were here, since I was here 2 weeks ago. Then I know that it's going to be very difficult. And then we have to talk about motivation. And how does one motivate? How does one stoke one's own fire and willpower to actually learn something new? Because it's not necessarily easy to learn something new.
No.
And there are personalities and constitutions that are more drawn to that and others that are not.
Yeah, well, but you're also bringing one of the core principles of yoga, abhyasa, the practice, which without practice there are no results.
That's right.
Now let's focus a little bit of one of the very important issues that affect us in the modern world, which is stress. Mm-hmm. How does yoga help stress, does it?
It does. I think the same core global effect, the global benefit I talked about, in which the yoga practices influence the nervous system, the breath, the heart rate, all of those factors, it starts to affect our stress response. Stress exists for all of us. And so our response to stress, the way our body might be hardwired to quickly go into the fight or flight response, or perhaps we're a little more grounded and we don't react so quickly. As my friend Nina says, let's not panic just quite yet. So she found that she was very anxious at one time in her life, and as she started practicing yoga, she started realizing that she would often become very anxious and worrisome before the worries about the future actually came to fruition. And oftentimes her predictions were inaccurate on what was going to happen. So she started to realize that as she was practicing yoga, that she could pause and create more space, especially when there were mental reactions coming up, that she could watch and notice, oh, I'm becoming reactive, I'm getting a little anxious, back up a little bit, give it a little space, and not trigger her stress response. So I think that a lot of the yoga techniques are very helpful in helping us recognize our triggers, how quickly we react to stressful actions, what kind of results they have when we become stressed out. Do we actually lose sleep? Do we start stress eating? Do we turn to alcohol or pot or something else as a way of assuaging our discomfort? Or can we actually choose our practice? Or can the practice actually allow us to identify our normal habits and then possibly choose some other habits? So I think that's a very powerful way in which yoga influences stress. I think stress is inevitable. I think that you can adjust your attitude towards stress. You can actually modify your attitude towards stress. I was just reading this fabulous Hafez poem, the 14th century Sufi poet who came a little bit after Rumi, maybe lesser known here in the West, but maybe more revered almost than Rumi in Persia, I hear from my Persian friends. In which he was talking about this idea of, that the person who's actually immersed in the truth sees every moment as the ultimate moment of creation, that whether it's good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, tragic or joyful, that the person who's immersed in truth actually has the perspective. I think it's the perspective to say that every moment has a quality of perfection in it. So if that's the case, I was caught in some traffic coming up here, and I was thinking, I'm going to be late for Antonio's session. And then I said, but I left at a reasonable time, and I can actually drop into this moment and see if there's a flow to it, and then experience the environment. And in that moment, everything shifted, and I wasn't becoming anxious and worried and perspiring, and my heart rate wasn't going up, and I dropped into it, and as it turns out, I was here on time anyway, because again, our projection of the future is often inaccurate, right? So there's a lot of avidya that goes on, a little misperception of the way reality.
And I would have 100 more questions for you, and I'm sure you would have 100 more responses, but our time is up. I want to thank you for having come to the show today and for share your wisdom and your experience with you. And I hope to have you here some other time.
It would be lovely to have another conversation since we just got started.
So thank you very much.
Sure, namaste to you.
My guest today was Baxter Bell. He has been actively deepening his understanding of yoga and relaxation since making the stress-reducing move from a career as a busy family doctor to that of a yoga teacher and medical acupuncturist. He is now involved in the integration of therapeutic applications of yoga with Western medicine, lecturing to healthcare professionals around the country, as well as adding yoga to his care of patients in his medical acupuncture practice. He is a graduate of the Piedmont Yoga Studio's 18-month advanced studies program and has since become director of their deep yoga program, teaching the experiential anatomy, yoga technique, and yoga methodology portions of the training. He is also on faculty for several teacher training programs around the country. He studied with Rodney Yee, Patricia Walden, and Erich Schiffmann, and has been strongly influenced by the work of TKV Desikachar and Donald Moyer. Baxter teaches classes, workshops, and retreats around the country and internationally. I hope you like our show today, and if you care to let me know, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com. I look forward to seeing you the next time.